I will just start by saying I think your voice is absolutely necessary in this time. And from one attorney to another, sis, you did that. Ate and
Thank
left no
you.
crumbs, as the kids say. So, my first question for you is when you describe yourself as a movement lawyer, what does that mean? And why is it necessary in this current era?
It's a lawyer who uses their legal skills, their advocacy in order to support movements, is what it sounds like. And so I spend my time, my energy basically nationwide assisting local movements, organizers, public defenders' offices, just individual people, better message, better be able to get our voices heard and get that perspective. Like, this kind of progressive, this advocacy, this on the ground perspective that we don't get to hear, trying to get that onto mainstream and independent media. And so that's what I do. I use what I learned in school and the skills that I developed in direct support of helping Black people.
I love everything about it. I do indeed. And the idea that as a public defender, you were uniquely positioned for that interview with one New York City Mayor Eric Adams. And this was a conversation I think a lot of people wanted to have with Mayor Adams. A lot of people still want to have this conversation with Mayor Adams. And I was actually curious as to how this conversation even started. Because when I first saw your post that you were interviewing Eric Adams, I was like, does he know who she is? Who agreed to this? Who authorized this? Who allowed this to happen? How did this interview with New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who has been in the crosshairs of a lot of critique lately, how did this conversation even come about?
Listen, I want y'all to know that I was as shocked as all of you. And so what happened was, funny enough, I got it because I was criticizing the Breakfast Club. I was criticizing the Breakfast Club for having Candace Owens on there. I had made a video on social media criticizing them. I obviously know Charlamagne. I have a previous Breakfast Club interview. So I put up the video and Charlamagne called me directly middle of dinner, like, what's up, Queen? Let me have it. and and I did. And so I spent like 45 minutes telling him, going back and forth with him with why I believe that was the wrong decision, why I think that's problematic. And we have a difference of opinion on this matter. But in that phone call, it was like over the weekend before this interview, he said, okay, we'll come on the Breakfast Club next week. So then around Tuesday, I reach out to try to confirm, like, okay, am I going on this week? Let's try and finalize this. And they were like, oh, I'm trying to have you in on Thursday with the mayor. I was like, the mayor who? Eric Adams? They're
Mm.
like, yeah. I was like, there's absolutely no way. I was like, no way that happens. I no way that happens. And I called my
And
mom
not
up.
because you didn't want it to happen, because you believe there's no way he would have
No
wanted it.
way. I was like, yeah, no way
Right.
him or anybody in his team okays this. Like, there's just no way. And so I was sure, I was prepared, but I was sure that this is not happening. Like, and I was there earlier than them to the interview. So I was, oh yeah, okay. This is it. This is gonna happen.
So
I
you was
was
ready either way. You was like, I'm gonna be there. I know he ain't gonna show up, but I'm gonna be there. We're gonna talk about something, even if it's not
exactly,
talking with him.
exactly.
Girl. And so he shows up.
Yes.
He agreed to sit down with you, and that, y'all, was just one clip. I think that the interview was almost an hour. That
Yeah.
was just one clip, and the entire time there were so many visual things happening. Playing it audibly almost doesn't even do the full justice, because there's one point where you are getting at him with absolute facts. You were clearly well researched, clearly well prepared, and there's one point where we see him viscerally turn away from you, did not even look at you while responding to others about the point he was making to you. What was it like, as in that moment, to be across from the mayor of this city as a woman, the only woman in that room at the table with the microphone? What was that moment like for you, to see him turn his back as he was giving an answer to something you raised, but giving it to other people in a way that almost felt dismissive? But I don't know if you
Mhm.
read it that way in the moment.
It was, which I think was beautiful. I wasn't upset about it. Everybody else in my life, like my mommy, my daddy, my boyfriend, everybody else was upset, but I was not. I was like, that's great, because everybody gets to see that. To me, the more he meandered, the more he tried to filibuster around the point, the more he overtly lied, the more he spoke over me, the more he spun his back. I'm like, beautiful. Now the city and Black people in particular who watch the Breakfast Club, who are not aware of what he actually performs like, because this isn't what he demonstrates to them, right? What he would have been giving had I not been there. Because it isn't about, you could be as prepared as you want, but Charlamagne and Envy are not who do that work. They're not going to be as familiar with his administration or his policies or what he does. So if he just lies, as he was attempting to do throughout the interview, then people would accept that. They would see and experience this version of him, this bro he was trying to do with Charlamagne. So it was actually beautiful. I was like, great, everybody gets to see that. You see why we have the problem with him we do.
Yeah, yeah, and it was on full display. And I don't even know if he was aware of it in the moment, but it was definitely on full display. And it said so much, even as not much was being said at all. Give us a sense as to some of the backlash, if any, that you've experienced after that. There was, we saw the NYPD there, which again, I will remind people has a budget that exceeds that of some small nations. The New York City the New York City Police Department. We saw how they were almost engaging in social media. I don't want to call it warfare, but their official social media accounts began then coming at you in a way that I thought was like, are we like, is this high school? Like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Who's tweeting this, and who's responsible for this? What was the backlash like?
Yeah, the NYPD. So originally, shortly after the interview, that's when the Post dropped their little hit piece, "Call Me Woke Lawyer," and taking the exact dog whistle that Eric Adams gave in the interview when he does that whole, "Oh, I don't want to take your words out of context," and proceeds to do it when he was feeding that narrative to right wing media. And I think it's very telling that the only people that are coming out to support him are explicitly right wing media and the police. That says a lot about where he falls and where his administration and political views stand. But the Post dropped their piece, Fox News dropped their piece, and then NYPD started from all their official Twitter accounts harassing me, telling me come to the funeral, this and the next thing. Honestly, I'm not bothered by it beyond a level of physical. To me, the more I see them do that, the more it really demonstrates to me the kind of clear failure they perceive that interview as for him. Because if you thought he did well, if you thought he held his own or whatever have you, you wouldn't be doing all of this, right? So
Hmm.
and also I think it's beautiful because as an advocate who's always trying to demonstrate to people the problem with the police state or the magnitude of a police state and what happens in a police state, I've never gotten a clearer example than you seeing a mayor not perform how he wanted in an interview, and now the NYPD is harassing an attorney and a person that conducted an interview. And so I think that's beautiful. To me, I'm just like, great. I'm glad that the public is able to see these things. I could never get a better example than showing you in real time the mayor fearmongering, showing you the police in real time. Other than just worrying about my physical safety, because the more they lose to me in the court of public opinion, it makes me worry, especially when they're alerting all the precincts to my face, my name. It makes me feel nervous because unlike as even though they would like people to believe otherwise, I live in the neighborhoods that I speak about. I live in Flatbush. I live in a black neighborhood. So all the policing, the over police isn't just something I can speak to from statistics. I can speak to it from my lived experience. I just didn't do that. I didn't go with my opinions. I went with the stats. But that being said, I walk by the police every day. So it's a little unnerving to me when the precincts are being like I'm public enemy number one. So but beyond that, it's fine. I think it's great.
Yeah. So for people who may not have seen the full video, who have not heard me ranting and raving about what's happening in New York City with the policing here, give us some high level points about some of your key critiques of the current mayor. And I'm asking this because I want to then go into a conversation about what it means to hold power accountable when power looks like the brother on the street. What does it mean to
Yeah.
hold power accountable when power is coming from our community? Because this is something that in my years as an activist, as an organizer, as an attorney, it seems to be something that we struggle with a lot. And I fear that if we don't get over this inability to speak truth to power when power looks like us, then it's going to end up feeding the power base of people who are in opposition to what it is that we need. So for people who are not clear, what are some of the high level critiques that you have of the current mayor and of the way in which that the NYPD polices within a variety of communities?
Yeah, the thing that's so important, I think, to make sure I say about Mayor Adams' administration, especially when it comes to the overtly anti-black policies and the over policing that he engages in, is people would look at that and say, "Oh, well, black people voted for him, like the majority of black people voted for him," and then use that to suggest that we support our own over policing and our rights being violated. But it's important to note that Mayor Adams did not present to black people what it is that he's doing. His from when he was on the campaign trail, he specifically presented himself as somebody who had been brutalized by the police as a young boy and then became a police officer in order to fight racism from the other side, when that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Like by his own admission in the Atlantic, he became a police officer because he saw that as a better way to get power. And he thought he would have the juice, quote unquote. He literally, by his own admission. So, and then since he's become mayor, what he has done is the first things he did. Well, in
But
2020,
wait, that know that story. The he got beat up, and then they said if you want to do something, you should change it. Is that
No,
you
so
believe that that's
when Mayor Adams, and this again, this is by his own admission, it's in his own story in an article in the Atlantic, but you also can go to my YouTube and watch my Eric Adams documentary in which we talk about it in the second chapter. But Mayor Adams, when he was
y'all,
14
she
years
got a whole
old,
documentary.
I
She got
sure
a whole
do.
documentary. She does.
When Mayor Adams was 14 years old, he was in a gang, him and his brother, and they were stealing. And so the police arrested him, and these white officers beat the brakes off of them. They beat him so bad that he had blood in his urine, all this is the next thing. A black officer who let this happen, but decides after a while, okay, that's enough. Stops
Ooh.
it. And Mayor Adams said this experience made his brother obviously have a deep loathing of the police, but not him. He looked at it and he said, that's what real power looks like. That I had more power than the gang.
Wow.
And he said that would be his opportunity to finally have real power, be respected on the streets, and and have the juice. That's what he said, the juice. So this is quite literally his explicit reason for why he became a police officer. So all this story gives people about, oh, he's doing it to fight racism from the inside. No, when he was fighting racism from the inside, it was because he was a police officer there looking out for his best interests. And now that he's mayor, he's been doing nothing but explicitly things that harm us and support the police. So one of the first things he did was they had disbanded in 2020, before he became mayor, they had disbanded these police units that had been found to be disproportionately shooting and killing black and brown people, like explicitly disbanded for those reasons. Eric Adams
Something
gets
that
into
people fought for. People
fought
fought,
for.
activists fought to have these units disbanded. Every group that we trust to do the work of police accountability and community safety fought for these units to be disbanded.
Exactly. He gets into office and he revives them. So now he revives them, rebrands them as his neighborhood safety teams. Those neighborhood safety teams have conducted 97% of their stops. They've conducted over 15,000 stops, and they've all been over 97% have been on Black or Latino people. And very few of these searches have yielded any results of crime or contraband or anything. And they've done an analysis that at least they know flat out, at least 25% of the stops are all unconstitutional outright. So the federal monitor, who's tasked with overseeing Rikers and overseeing NYPD and reporting to making sure they're in constitutional compliance, has found that there is absolutely the return of stop and frisk, and that the stop and frisk levels are worse than what it was during the Bloomberg era. But I'm sure if you're living in a neighborhood like mine, you can physically see that. So that's the first and second things that he did that I would say my third point, and not least of which, is Rikers. Since Mayor Adams became mayor, 31 people have died in Rikers. And if you're wondering why you didn't hear about that, that's because his administration ended the policy of informing people of in-custody deaths, the public. So
I'm
no
sorry,
longer.
What? Slow down.
Yep,
Hold on. Wait a minute now. Hold on. Wait. There was a policy in place that when someone died in custody, the public would be notified about it, and that
exactly.
policy was repealed?
Ended under Eric Adams, completely ended, because
Huh.
he got tired of the outrage, backlash from people like me informing the public of who's dying in Rikers, and so they completely got rid of the policy. He said, "Oh, that was a De Blasio era policy. We're done with that." So if that's why I have the problem that I have with Mayor Adams is specifically, it's funny because when people don't know any better, they like to say they think you're coming after a black man and why are you doing this in a black man? I'm like, because that black man is working against the interests of black people explicitly.
Ooh. Let's pause there for a minute. Let's pause there for a minute. This is the underlying point that I wanted to really get at. As much as I wanted to I could take you to lunch and kiki about that video and interview for 11 years. But this part right here, this is the most salient point to me. When it comes to critiquing Black elected officials, we have seen this at the federal level. We've seen it at the local level. There feels like, and please let me know if there's better language for me to use. It feels like we have an inability within our community to hold Black elected officials accountable speaking with our full chest, speaking what needs to be said because of a sense of protectionism. And what you just said really cut through that. It's not that you're trying to take down a black man. It's that this particular elected official who happens to be a black man is supporting policies that are harmful to the black community. Period, point blank. Why? Why, Ms. Olurin? I want to make sure I get your name correct. Why is it that we seem to have such difficulty in being able to do that at a broader level?
Because I think we're inclined, we are so rarely in these spaces. I think there's still a lot of us that want to get in those spaces. We recognize the difficulty that it takes for us to get on those spaces. We recognize that Black people are held in general at a higher scrutiny. And so we have a reluctance to feel like we are helping dogpile Black people who are successful in trying to navigate these white spaces and everything that comes with it. And that's fair. And I understand that. I understand that. And I even experienced that on some level with Black people wanting to give more grace to Black people in general. But that's not what we're talking about here. I'm like, give that grace to Black celebrities, Black people who are not doing anything, who are not holding power over your life, right? But in terms of Black elected officials who make it their business, not just to fail to hear us or fail to invest in us, but to actively harm us. It's not that I'm just critiquing Mayor Adams because I'm saying, oh, he's not doing enough for Black people. I'm not saying that. I'm not even, we can't even get to that because I have to talk about the explicit harm he is causing Black people. Under his watch, more Black people are dying awaiting trial than they ever were. Under his watch, more Black people having their constitutional rights violated and being subjected to over policing and racial profiling and being criminalized. There's a reason why we have to say these things. So I understand and I share in that in people's sympathy and empathy and their desire to want to protect our own. But what I'm trying to say to us is this isn't one of our own. He's NYPD's.
Wow, that's a heavy statement, and we're seeing iterations of that in other arenas as well. You mentioned earlier that you put out a video as to your critiques for why the Breakfast Club had Candace Owens, and we've seen a number of Black outlets that have platformed her. I don't often speak her name on these airways, so I don't mean to shock the audience, but give us a sense as to what harm comes from Black platforms, even whether they're Black owned, Black led, or just Black facing. What is the harm that comes from platforming someone like a Candace Owens, giving someone like her a platform? Is she harming the Black community in the same way that, say, an Eric Adams is under your critique? What are your thoughts as to her impact? Since she's not elected, but she certainly is used, her voice is used in many ways to excuse a lot of policies that I think are in fact harmful to Black people.
She's an anti-Black white supremacist puppet, and we all know that. We all know that, and that's recognized. It's important to remember that these Black avatars are not speaking to us or for us. They are for white people to be able to point to and say, this Black person said that. The Candace Owens isn't somebody with a Black audience. Are there Black people in her audience? Yes, but this is a person speaking to millions of white people. And because Black people recognize what she is, they recognize that this is an anti-Black woman. They recognize that she is there to legitimize racist talking points, right? So the problem with Black outlets that have that, like the Breakfast Club, that does have a Black audience where Black people trust or Black people listen to, if you come and bring this person, somebody that should have been rightfully dismissed because Black people should not be internalizing these white supremacist talking points and helping work with our oppressors. Now that you brought her on here, then now you're introducing her to a bunch of people who may not be familiar with the array of what she's done. They weren't familiar with all of that. And now you're saying to them that this is somebody they could listen to. And I explained this to Charlamagne, the danger of thinking, okay, well, I had her talking about the things that she makes good points about or something. And I'm like, that's worse, because now what you're doing is you're saying to them, you're legit. If you can cite to somebody and tell people that this is somebody you could rely on their opinion for something, then you give way for them to rely on their opinion for other things. Now, people that you've introduced her to decide to go feed into that and go view her, and next thing you know, now we're combating white supremacist thought within our own community. So that's why it's harmful. I recognize that people have different views on this. They have a very like both sides thing. But the funny thing is, we've always heard both sides. This idea, or not both sides, we've always heard their side. The status quo, white supremacy, is the status quo. That is what's baked into everything. And we have that regurgitated to us in a million forms. There's no reason why we who never get to have the space to get out our views, our ideas, or speak for our community. We never get that. We never have the outlets. When we do have platforms, all we want to do is give space and breath to the exact viewpoints that we have been trying to crush. So that makes no sense. There's no objectivity in white supremacy, and that's what people don't realize, because white supremacy is what teaches you that you have to hear their point of view, that needs to be responded to. No, it doesn't. We hear it everywhere. So
Whew. I know somebody somewhere is getting their entire life. So, Olayemi, do you prefer Olayemi or Ole? I know your show, Ole and Friends, is phenomenal. Y'all are doing the damn thing with some great conversations. If y'all want to hear some awesome Gen Z millennial discussion on a whole host of topics, you need to be tuned into this sister show. What name do you actually prefer?
my name is
Should I ask you this?
Olayemi, and I go by Olayemi in my real life. All my friends call me Olayemi, or call me my friends at home in the Bahamas, like my Bahamian family, will call me Yemi. I don't like that. That's reserved for them and Nigerians, because I can't stop them. But I let
You
people
have no
call
power
me.
there.
Yeah, Olay was just easier in the media world, so people could stop stressing themselves out, like having to struggle to mispronounce it a million. So I was just like, oh, say
All of our
Olay.
colonized tongues.
Yeah, yeah. So like Olay is for the streets, but I go by Olayemi in my real life.
Olayemi. I've been saying Olayemi. I've been saying everything. That's why I was like, Miss Olurin is what we're
Listen,
gonna
and
call her.
it be like
Olayemi.
that. It really do
Listen,
be
the
like that.
colonized tongue. It's we're trying to decolonize our brains. We got to decolonize our tongues. It's a lot. It's a lot. So listen, how do I spot an anti-black person if they're running for office? If they come into my church asking for funding, what are some of the telltale signs that would help us if they want to be on this show? What are some of the telltale signs of an anti-black person? Because it can be hard to spot sometimes.
I
Although I
think
feel like some of our vision is a little blurred intentionally.
I think we can spot it. I just don't think we're looking for it. Like I think we have to make more of a concerted energy to be into our politicians and our local politics, because everything that I tell people that you can see the minute I tell you that about Mayor Adams, that was in the Atlantic. I didn't have to go do a deep dive for that. They're giving these
Right.
interviews. They are in their interviews. They are talking and they are saying the crazy things. I think what we need to do is, one, look for it, and two, trust ourselves. When you hear a politician and that don't sound right to you, it sounds like, am I being bamboozled? Are you trying to swing me?
Mm.
You're being swung. I think that's what you should do. Just look for it and trust yourself.
And I think more of us are going to be open to looking for it now because, again, even the desire to find a critique, a lot of us will shy away from it. A lot of people are very concerned. Quite frankly, the fact that I am on this show and having this conversation with you, and then we'll leave this show and then go to run the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, there are a lot of folks who would say, well, Lurie, if you have these critiques, what's that going to mean for the center? What you mean what it's going to mean for the center? The center is a pro-African, pan-African institution that envisions a politically sophisticated and engaged Black electorate. Why would I not have these critiques in that position as well as here, which is one of the reasons why there's no disconnect between the words I say here and the work we do in New York City, because that's what it means to walk in integrity. One last question that I have for you before we get to the end of the show. When it comes to 2024 and what's on the line, elections, I know you are a movement lawyer, you're a public defender, but the reality is we need all of us at the forefront. What are you thinking about when it comes to not Project 2025, that's another topic. What are you thinking about when it comes to this election, when it comes to what's at stake? What are your thoughts for people who are like, listen, I hear you on Candace Owens, but sometimes she be making a good point, and they're sort of in that fake and undecided space. I call it fake because I don't really believe there are people who are undecided, but they sit in this space of wanting to give the other side an option to convince them, even though, as you said, we spend our whole lives trying to stop the other side from being able to have the dominance over the microphone. What are your thoughts about this election and how we should take this analysis, this ability to not vote for a Black person simply because they are Black, particularly when they are engaging in anti-Black policies and rhetoric? What are your thoughts on how we should meaningfully engage with the election going forward?
I think that we need to vote for the weakest adversary. First of all, I want to say I respect however anybody chooses to go about using or exercising their votes. You will get no condemnation or vote shaming from me. But what I will say is this: change comes from the people, and I mean that in a serious way. But when people have a lot of a tendency when they talk about the election or they talk about political parties, it's like, oh well, the Democrats don't do anything, the Republicans don't do this, but whatever, who doesn't do this? None of them do anything. As someone who does this work on the ground, like as an organizer, as an advocate, as an activist, and help supporting these movements, the laws and the progressive changes that you get, like say you get bail reform in New York City, or you get bail reform in Illinois, you get bail reform in New Jersey, it might be passed under those politicians, but it was started by a bunch of people on the ground, a bunch of organizers and policymakers and people who drafted that and made that happen and went and like lobbied a politician, spoke to a politician, had meetings with them, and like convinced some politician to sponsor it and take it there. The change itself is actually coming on the ground. So what matters to me when I look at it from that perspective is, who are we able to convince? So as somebody who does this work and is actively saving bail reform and doing these kinds of things and talking to politicians, Republicans are a brick wall. Like beyond, this isn't about thinking one is better than the other, or one cares about Black people more than the other, or one isn't good. No. It's not about any of that. They're all, yes, all your critiques you want to make about them all being committed to the establishment and over policing and privilege and all these things is true. But Republicans are not even, and there is no world in which we as organizers on the ground are able to even get a Republican to entertain that. But Democrats every day, we're able to push them, get them on board, nudge them along, get them to sponsor bills. And that's the reason why you see the progressive laws and the things that you do see happening. So it's not about the politicians, or it's not about choosing the lesser of two evils. This isn't about having a moral debate about whether or not that's real or who's the lesser of two evils. Nobody cares about that. For me, it's about, I need the weakest adversary, because the government in and of itself, the government is always in opposition to the people. The government's job is to maintain the status quo. So the government always acts as an operation, like an oppositional force to what the people want, which is why it's called a resistance. When you lead, when you resist the government, it's resistance, because the government is that force. So for me, it's about which wall is easiest to break down. And you could break down a Democrat's wall, but you cannot break down the Republicans' wall. So for me, it's about voting for the weakest adversary.
That was a perfect answer. Jonah, I need that on a loop, please, if you wouldn't mind. We need that in an audiogram. I lied and said that was my last question. I actually have one follow up. Your background, Bahamian and Nigerian. There's a
Yes.
lot of discussion right now around issues and questions of reparations, questions of who gets access or should have access to what. And we continually point to examples of people. I'm one of those folks who believes that reparations is a Pan-African issue. It's something that needs to be
Yeah.
approached not just locally, but globally. What are your thoughts on what appears to be a Black American nativism strain that is injecting itself into the discourse that seeks to, in some ways, discount, discredit, or dismiss the presence of Black immigrants? Particularly, and I'm asking this after you answered all of these questions the way that you answered them, because the whole audience right now sees your value. The whole
Yeah.
audience right now can tell how dynamic you are and what a powerful sister you are, and how blessed we are to have you on this side of the line as opposed to the other. But there is a Black nativist element that would seek to discount and discredit what you say simply because of your ancestry.
Oh,
What are your
absolutely.
thoughts on that particular strain infecting our dialogue within Pan-African spaces?
Absolutely. Okay. So I guess a two-part answer. The first thing is, I think Black Americans are entitled to pursue reparations and feel that they deserve that, and they do. I think that like unequivocally they have that right, and that they absolutely should have that. Whether the U.S. government has any business in ever doing that is a separate question. But are Black Americans are Black Americans entitled to reparations? Yes. So that's the one. The two, yes, there is this wave of it's funny because it's white supremacy's fault. It's to make us be infighting. It's intentional, right? If you look at it, every other immigrant group in this country, or every white people, right? All the Italians, the Polish, the Irish, all these different people that have come over throughout history and were not originally recognized as white, embraces white in their countries, and then the U.S. is literally, there's Supreme Court cases on this, decided to represent them as white because it was better for them as a populace, and so they embrace immigration. They embrace their migrant communities. They've always have, and
Mm.
yet this narrative has been fed to us that Black immigrants are somehow a threat to Black Americans, or that we're here, that we're not Black, and all these different things. And that's intentional, because we have less power when we are divided. It's quite literally that simple. And I think what people need to remember and recognize is, one, as a Black immigrant, you have literally, you're an immigrant. You don't have rights here. You're not a citizen here. I wouldn't, I don't make my platform about myself. So my core thing that I talk about is not immigration. But when I tell you immigration has had me in a shackle since I was 14 years old, you have no idea. All the things you see me do, I do for free. I do all this advocacy and these different things because that's what immigration requires and forces, So it's interesting to see being Black people misled to believe that immigrants are a threat or are taking something from us. I think it's important to remember that we are all Blackness, and our Blackness should not be defined by our oppression or how white supremacists or the white world wants to see us. We shouldn't be defining Blackness by slavery or abuse and these different things. But if we were going to, we share that. That is a shared history. I want you to know.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think it's just important that we stand together and we not embrace xenophobia. And I want to be clear, it both goes both sides. To the Black Americans that are saying that they know African Black people or Caribbean Black people that have felt that they're better than them, and there's definitely an element to that. I definitely have family and people in the Bahamas who don't live in America. They've never been in America, so they don't understand that history, that social context, or anything like that. And they're being fed their ideas about Black people and Black Americans from white supremacist media. And so you're right. I'm sure you've experienced that, and I'm sure it goes both ends. But I want us to recognize that is white supremacist thinking that is being fed to both of us, to all our different groups of Black people. But we are all Black, and white supremacy treats us the same in that regard.
Indeed. I planned on saying goodbye after this, and now we got a whole bunch of phone calls that just came in. And y'all know why y'all do this all the time? We have an amazing guest, and then y'all wait to the last minute to call in. Tyrone, I can't get to your question just because I know it's gonna require a lot. But there is a one caller who wants to say that the mayor can only do so much. Ms. Olurin, what do you say to that? He can only do so much. He doesn't dictate NYPD structures and policies. What's your quick
Yes.
30-second response to that?
First of all, the mayor can do a lot. He's the mayor. He's doing active things, but more importantly, the last year when Mayor Adams was telling us that he has to cut budgets across the city, that there's no money to find any of that, you might have missed because of the migrant crisis and all this different stuff he was feeding us. You might have missed when he signed a historic deal with the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, only the third one like it in 30 years, a voluntary agreement where he gave them more, $100 million more dollars, increased all their pay rates, allowed them to do more overtime, and he's caused more than $500 million in overtime for NYPD since he became mayor. So the mayor can do a lot, and he is doing a lot actively to enrich the NYPD. That's why they're going as hard for him as they are.
All right, so I'm going to do something that I swore to my team I would not do. I'm going to take this next call. This is Representative Quanta Cruz, who's on the line. Representative Cruz, you have, unfortunately, 30 seconds before the man cuts us off. What are your thoughts on today's conversation?
I am so thankful. Thank you to Lurie and to Ms. Olurin for the conversation. It is so timely. And I just want to say thank you. I have more to say, but just thank you. And I just appreciate you. I'm going to the Capitol. I'm walking there right now. But thank you for this show, Lurie. And thank you, Ms. Olurin. I'll be reaching out.
You guys, thank you so much.
Representative Cruz, we're going to get you on this air so we can have a real conversation. Ms. Olurin, give us the best way for people to connect with you. I hate when I take calls at the very end because it always happens, but I had to get that one in. Go ahead. How should people connect with you from here going forward?
You could follow me on all social medias at Miss Olurin, MSOLURIN, and you should subscribe to my YouTube channel, Olurinati. I drop episodes of Olay and Friends every Sunday. I'm going to text you, Lurie, to go be on my episode that we're recording on Friday. So yeah, subscribe to Olurinati and follow me at Miss Olurin.